Before dawn broke over France, church bells rang not for prayer but for command. In the cold hours of October 13th, 1307, royal messengers rode through sleeping towns carrying sealed orders marked with the king's sigil. They were not to be opened until first light. When they were, the instructions were chillingly precise. Arrest every Knight Templar, seize their property, and allow no warning. It was a nationwide operation executed with a speed that feels unsettlingly modern. As the sun rose, doors were kicked in, swords drawn, and some of the most powerful men in medieval Europe were dragged from their beds in silence. Templars who had fought for Christendom, financed kings, and guarded pilgrims now stood confused and unarmed, accused of crimes they had never heard before. No public debate preceded the arrests. No summons was issued. The strike came everywhere, all at once, as if rehearsed. What makes this morning so disturbing is not only its brutality, but its coordination. France, in 1307, had no telegraphs, no radios, no centralized police force. Yet the arrests unfolded with near-perfect timing. Historians still struggle to explain how such secrecy was maintained, how no warning leaked, and how an entire order was neutralized in a single dawn. It felt less like medieval justice and more like a calculated purge. And as the dust settled, one question lingered in the quiet streets of Paris and beyond. How did the king know when to strike, and what did he fear most of all? The charges that followed the arrests were as shocking as the arrests themselves. Knights Templar, once praised as defenders of Christendom, were suddenly accused of spitting on the cross, worshiping idols, engaging in secret sexual rites, and denying Christ during initiation ceremonies. To medieval ears, these were not minor offenses, but spiritual treason, crimes that justified destruction without mercy. Yet historians quickly run into a contradiction. For nearly 2 centuries, the Templars had operated under direct papal authority. Popes had inspected their rituals, blessed their missions, and granted them extraordinary privileges. Kings donated land. Churches welcomed them. Pilgrims trusted them. If heresy was embedded in the order, how had it gone unnoticed for generations? The accusations themselves shift depending on the source. Some Templars confessed, then later retracted their statements. Others described rituals that made little sense, contradicting one another in disturbing ways. Many confessions were extracted under torture, raising doubts that refused to fade. Even contemporaries questioned the charges, whispering that something deeper was at play. What makes the case even stranger is timing. These allegations surfaced only after the arrests began, not before. There was no prior investigation, no theological debate, no warning from Rome. Guilt was declared first, evidence assembled later. To this day, scholars remain divided. Were the Templars secretly corrupted, or were the charges a convenient fiction? And if they were invented, what truth needed to be buried beneath such unbelievable lies? That leaves historians staring at a mystery still unresolved today, without clear answers. The arrests were loud, but what followed was silence. After the initial shock of October 1307, official records begin to thin, then fracture, then vanish altogether. Letters stop mid-sentence. Testimonies reference documents that no longer exist. It is as if history itself hesitated, unsure of what it was allowed to record. Witnesses who spoke too freely seem to fade from the archive. Some die in prison before trial. Others recant, contradicting statements they supposedly gave only days earlier. Interrogation transcripts rarely align. One account describes rituals that another denies ever happened. Dates shift. Locations change. Names are misspelled or omitted entirely, small details that suggest haste, confusion, or deliberate manipulation. Even royal investigators appear uncertain. Questions repeat across different trials as though officials were fishing rather than confirming. They ask about idols, secret meetings, and forbidden objects, yet never seem satisfied with the answers. The focus drifts from theology to possessions, from belief to inventory. What did the Templars own? Where was it kept? Who else knew? For historians, this sudden fog is deeply suspicious. Medieval bureaucracies were slow but meticulous. Silence of this scale is not accidental. Something disrupted the normal flow of record-keeping, either through fear or intent. As the storm of accusations passed, what remained was an absence too large to ignore, and within that absence, a disturbing possibility takes shape. The trials were never about guilt at all, but about locating something already gone. Whatever it was, someone ensured history would never easily speak again clearly. When royal agents finally entered the great Templar commanderies, they expected to find mountains of wealth. Chronicles describe vaults heavy with coin, reliquaries lined with gold, shelves of documents recording decades of transactions and secrets. Instead, investigators walked into echoing rooms. Chests stood open and empty. Storerooms showed signs of recent use, but nothing of value remained. In Paris, the Temple fortress was meant to hold the order's central treasury. King Philip's men broke seals, forced doors, and descended into chambers rumored to finance kingdoms. What they found stunned them. The treasure was gone. No gold, no silver, no sacred vessels, no records explaining where it had been sent. For an order accused of corruption, this absence was deeply inconvenient. Elsewhere, the pattern repeated. Across France, inventories listed buildings, furniture, even livestock, yet priceless objects were conspicuously absent. Archives that should have detailed centuries of banking operations had vanished. Relics said to be guarded by sworn knights were nowhere to be found. It was as if someone had cleared the stage just moments before the curtain rose. The speed of this disappearance raises an uncomfortable question. The arrests were sudden, but the evacuation was thorough. Removing such wealth would have required planning, access, and silence. Someone knew what was coming. As investigators reported empty vaults, suspicion shifted. The trials no longer felt like justice. They felt like a frantic search, begun too late for something that had already slipped beyond reach. And history would never clearly record what disappeared next. Long before Europe trusted coins stamped by kings, it trusted the Knights Templar. In an age when roads were dangerous and theft was common, the Templars created something revolutionary, a financial system built on reputation, secrecy, and sacred obligation. A pilgrim could deposit gold at a Templar house in Paris and retrieve its value months later in Jerusalem, using nothing more than a coded document. Only the order could interpret. Over time, this system expanded far beyond pilgrims. Nobles stored fortunes with the Templars. Monarchs borrowed heavily from them. Churches entrusted relics, land deeds, and sacred objects to their vaults. The order became not just warriors, but Europe's financial backbone, quietly moving wealth across borders without armies or banners. This power came with an unsettling side effect. Kings who ruled by force now depended on men who answered only to the Pope. The Templars were exempt from taxes, immune to local laws, and answerable to no crown. Their treasuries were rumored to rival royal coffers, and their records contained knowledge of debts no ruler wanted exposed. For a medieval king drowning in war expenses, this was intolerable. Gold meant power, but information meant leverage. The Templars possessed both. To some, they looked less like servants of God and more like a shadow authority operating behind the throne. By the early 14th century, their wealth was no longer admired. It was feared. And fear, when mixed with desperation, has a way of turning trusted guardians into convenient enemies almost overnight. At the heart of the mystery stood the Paris Temple, the most powerful stronghold the Knights Templar possessed. Rising above the city like a stone vault, it was believed to house the order's central treasury, a place where kings deposited fortunes and crusades were financed. When royal officials finally gained access, expectations were immense. What they found instead was deeply unsettling. The vaults were intact. The locks were unbroken. The walls showed no sign of forced entry, and yet they were empty. Chambers described in earlier records as overflowing with silver and gold now echoed with footsteps. Shelves that should have held chests of coin were bare. Even the detailed financial ledgers that tracked loans to monarchs had vanished, leaving no trace of where the wealth had gone. This absence was more disturbing than any discovery could have been. The Paris Temple was heavily guarded, its movements monitored, its importance well known. Removing such vast resources would have required time, coordination, and absolute secrecy. Yet no official orders recorded such a transfer, and no destination was ever named. Investigators searched for hidden compartments and sealed doors, convinced something had been overlooked. Some chambers were found mysteriously walled off, their purpose undocumented. Others appeared recently disturbed, as if emptied in haste but carefully concealed afterward. For King Philip's men, the empty temple raised a terrifying possibility. The Templars had not been caught off guard. They had anticipated the blow, and whatever once lay within these walls had already slipped through the king's grasp, leaving behind only silence and unanswered questions. As investigators struggled to explain the empty vaults, another rumor refused to fade. Along the French coast, witnesses later claimed that Templar ships had quietly left port in the days just before the arrests. These were not military departures announced with ceremony, but silent movements at night, vessels slipping into the open sea without recorded destination. Ports like La Rochelle were known Templar strongholds, heavily used for trade and transport. According to later accounts, ships were seen loading cargo under unusual secrecy. Crates were moved without inspection. Harbor officials asked no questions or were never allowed to. Then, just days later, the arrests began and the ships were gone. What makes these stories so unsettling is what followed. There are no official records of these vessels arriving elsewhere. No manifests, no customs logs, no royal seizures. They vanish from history entirely, as if swallowed by the ocean or deliberately erased from the record. Skeptics argue these accounts are legend, built from fear and hindsight, yet the consistency is hard to ignore. Multiple regions describe the same pattern: hurried departures, trusted crews, and destinations known only to the order. If nothing valuable was being moved, why the urgency? The idea that ships escaped suggests planning at the highest level. Someone warned the Templars. Someone knew the moment of betrayal in advance. And if ships did sail, carrying cargo no king ever recovered, then the greatest treasures of the order may never have touched land again. By the end of the searches, a troubling realization began to form. If the missing wealth were only gold, the king might have accepted the loss as an unfortunate escape. But the intensity of the trials suggested something else entirely. Officials seemed less concerned with counting coins and more obsessed with what the Templars had possessed, guarded and possibly removed. Gold could be replaced. Relics and knowledge could not. The order was known to safeguard objects of immense symbolic power, sacred vessels, ancient texts, and items tied to biblical history itself. Such objects carried authority far beyond monetary value. In a world ruled by faith, symbols could destabilize kingdoms. This possibility reframes everything. What if the arrests were not driven by greed alone, but by fear? Fear that certain objects, if revealed, could undermine the church, challenge doctrine, or expose uncomfortable truths about history and belief. In that light, the urgency makes sense. So does the silence that followed. Some historians argue the missing treasure was exaggerated, a myth born from absence. Others point to the consistency of reports describing not just wealth, but sacred items entrusted to the order. If even one such object existed, it would explain the desperation of the search and the brutality of the suppression. Perhaps the greatest danger was not what the Templars owned, but what those objects represented. Power outside royal control, authority beyond papal permission, truths that could not be safely explained. If that is the case, then what vanished in 1307 was not merely treasure. It was something far more threatening, something history was never meant to see again. When the Knights Templar were first formed, they were not granted a random headquarters. They were given quarters on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, one of the most sacred and tightly controlled sites in the medieval world. Officially, they were poor knights tasked with protecting pilgrims. Unofficially, they occupied ground layered with religious memory, political tension, and ancient secrecy. The Temple Mount was believed to be the site of Solomon's temple, the heart of biblical history. Access to its deeper structures was restricted even in the 12th century. Yet the Templars lived there for years, moving freely beneath its foundations. Contemporary accounts describe them as guardians, but their early activities raise questions. They owned no land, fought no battles, and spent long periods underground. Other religious orders noticed this strangeness. Chroniclers remark on the Templars' sudden rise in influence, despite their lack of visible achievements. Donations flowed in from across Europe, as if benefactors believed the order was protecting something far more important than travelers on dusty roads. Their privileged access was unprecedented. While pilgrims prayed above, the Templars explored below. In areas tied to lost chambers, sealed vaults, and biblical legend. Later writers would speculate that they were searching for relics, texts, or proof of sacred history buried beneath centuries of rubble. Whether archaeologists or guardians, the Templars were positioned at the crossroads of faith and secrecy, and whatever they encountered in Jerusalem would shape the order forever, long before kings turned against them. Those early years remain obscured, leaving behind only hints of discoveries never openly described. For centuries, the Holy Grail lived between sermon and song, a vessel of salvation, a symbol of divine favor, a prize that stayed just out of reach. But in the decades after the Crusades, the Grail begins to appear in places that feel less like folklore and more like whispered reportage. Court poets write of secret keepers, guarded lineages, and a brotherhood of warriors sworn to protect a sacred object from unworthy hands. Again and again, the shadow behind the story resembles the Templars. The timing is hard to ignore. Grail romances bloom in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, right as the Templars reach their peak power in Jerusalem and Europe. Some texts describe knights who are not merely seekers, but custodians. men who already possess the mystery and defend it through silence. The Grail is not won, it is safeguarded. That distinction matters. If the Grail were invention, why attach it to an order already feared for secrecy and discipline? Why portray its guardians as monks with swords, living by strict vows, moving through fortified houses, answering to no king? The writers may have dressed fact and myth to make it survivable. And then there is the unsettling pattern. The closer a tale leans toward the Templars, the more it insists the truth cannot be spoken plainly. It must be hinted, encoded, protected. What if the Grail story was not a fantasy of finding, but a warning of keeping, because someone, somewhere, believed the relic was real? Relics were the medieval world's proof that heaven had touched earth. To possess one was to possess legitimacy, pilgrims, and power. So when later traditions claim the Templars held objects tied to the crucifixion, the claims land like a match near dry straw. The shroud said to bear Christ's imprint. The holy lance said to have pierced his side. Fragments of the true cross, wood believed to have witnessed the final breath. Skeptics note how easily relics multiplied. Every cathedral wanted a miracle. Every ruler wanted sacred endorsement. Yet the Templars were not ordinary collectors. They were in the East at the right moment, moving through Jerusalem, Antioch, and Constantinople as crusade and conquest flooded markets with holy trophies. They also had the perfect infrastructure to move and hide priceless items, fortified houses, disciplined couriers, and vault that answered to no local lord. What makes these relics explosive is not their material value, but their authority. A shroud displayed, a lance paraded, a cross fragment authenticated. Each could shift devotion away from bishops and toward whoever controlled access. Even rumors of such custody could unsettle church politics and royal propaganda, and the rumors persist in inconvenient ways. Some Templar lists mention cloth and spears without detail. Trial interrogators probe about a cross as if chasing a specific lead. If these were fantasies, why ask so insistently? Because if even one relic was real, the Order's destruction was not only punishment, it was containment. And containment raises the question, where now? If the Templars truly guarded relics of exceptional prestige, you would expect the paper trail to be thick. Donations recorded, transfers witnessed, inventories copied, sermons celebrating new wonders. Instead, after 1307, references thin out like a river entering sand. Mentions of extraordinary objects become vague, then vanish. Even hostile trial documents, which relish scandal, rarely describe relics in a way that could be verified. That absence can be explained by chance. Archives burn, wars erase libraries, scribes make mistakes. But the pattern is too neat. The arrests triggered a vast seizure of property. Royal clerks itemized mundane furniture with obsessive care, and yet the things that would have mattered most to power, ledgers, seals, reliquaries, texts, are the very things that slip away. It suggests two possibilities, and both are unsettling. The first is practical. The Templars moved key items before the net closed, leaving investigators to catalog what was left behind. The second is darker. Someone did find the objects and then ensured they stopped existing on paper. In medieval politics, controlling a relic meant controlling the story around it. Sometimes the safest way to possess something was to deny it existed. We also see later substitutions, saints' bones discovered, new relic cults promoted, older claims quietly abandoned. It feels like history reorganizing itself to fill a dangerous gap. So when modern researchers search for Templar relics, they are not only chasing lost objects, they are chasing the silence built around them. And silence, by design, always protects something. The Order of the Knights Templar began not with armies or banners, but with 9 men and an oddly quiet purpose. In 1119, these knights took vows of poverty and obedience, yet immediately received privileges that made no sense for a group so small. They were granted lodging on the Temple Mount itself, at the heart of Jerusalem's most sacred ground, a place layered with centuries of religious significance and political tension. For nearly a decade, these 9 knights undertook no major military campaigns. They defended no major routes. Chroniclers note their presence, but not their battles. Instead, later accounts hint that they spent much of their time below ground. They were soldiers by title, but their behavior resembled something closer to scholars or excavators. This contradiction has troubled historians for centuries. Why would a new order of warrior monks be placed at such a sensitive location and then seemingly do nothing publicly useful? The Temple Mount was believed to sit atop the ruins of Solomon's Temple, a site associated with lost treasures, sacred texts, and divine encounters. Medieval minds believed history slept beneath stone. Donations began to arrive anyway. Nobles across Europe poured resources into this quiet brotherhood, as if convinced the knights were engaged in a mission too important to describe openly. Their poverty was symbolic. Their backing was immense. When the order later emerged powerful, wealthy, and secretive, some wondered if the real foundation of Templar influence was laid not on the battlefield, but underground. Whatever those 9 knights were doing beneath Jerusalem, it reshaped their destiny long before the world noticed. Beneath the Temple Mount lies a labyrinth that even today remains only partially explored. Ancient tunnels, sealed chambers, and passageways carved through bedrock stretch beneath the surface. Restricted for centuries due to their religious and political sensitivity, in the 12th century, access to these depths was even more tightly controlled, and yet the Templars lived directly above them. Later, travelers and chroniclers describe the order engaging in extensive underground activity. Tools were carried below. Debris was removed discreetly. Work was conducted away from public view, shielded by the authority of their location. Some accounts describe night labor. Others speak of guarded entrances that no outsider was permitted to approach. What exactly they were excavating remains unknown. Legends claim the tunnels led to sealed vaults, untouched since antiquity. Others suggest they followed passages tied to the First Temple, believed to contain sacred deposits hidden before Jerusalem's destruction. No official Templar record explains their purpose, an omission that feels intentional. Modern archaeology confirms the existence of vast subterranean structures beneath the mount, many of which are off limits even now. This fuels speculation that the Templars accessed areas modern researchers cannot. If true, they may have encountered artifacts or texts unseen for centuries. The unsettling part is not that tunnels existed, but that the Templars alone were positioned to explore them freely. And whatever they found, they carried forward in silence, guarded not by walls, but by vows. That history still cannot penetrate. Among the most persistent rumors surrounding the Templars is that they discovered manuscripts beneath Jerusalem that challenged accepted Christian doctrine. These were not ordinary texts, but writings said to predate the Gospels, offering alternative accounts of Christ, early believers, or divine authority itself. Such documents would have been explosive in a world governed by theological certainty. Medieval Christianity relied on carefully curated scripture. The church decided which texts were sacred and which were heretical. Anything that contradicted this structure was dangerous, not just spiritually, but politically. Knowledge could fracture faith, and fractured faith threatened order. Some later accusations against the Templars hint at exposure to forbidden ideas. Interrogators asked strange questions about denial of Christ, secret teachings, and reinterpretations of doctrine. These questions feel less like moral outrage and more like attempts to trace intellectual contamination. There is no surviving proof these texts existed, but absence may be the point. Manuscripts are easier to destroy than monuments. A book burned leaves little trace. A book hidden leaves only rumor. If the Templars encountered writings that reframed Christian origins, secrecy would have been essential. Public revelation could have dismantled centuries of authority overnight. Silence in that context becomes a form of protection, whether real or imagined. The idea of lost texts lingers because it explains so much: the order's secrecy, its unusual beliefs, and the fear it inspired. Sometimes the most dangerous relic is not something you hold, but something you read. When the Templars were destroyed, their enemies did not merely seize swords and armor. They searched for something less tangible, something that could not be paraded through streets or melted down. The trials, with their obsession over beliefs, rituals, and symbols, suggest a deeper anxiety. The true threat may not have been what the Templars owned, but what they knew. Weapons can be confiscated, armies can be disbanded. Knowledge is harder to erase. If the Order uncovered information that contradicted sacred history, exposed suppressed truths, or redefined religious authority, then eliminating the messengers would not be enough. The knowledge itself had to be buried. This reframes the entire collapse of the Order. The brutality, the speed, the coordination all begin to resemble containment rather than punishment, a firebreak against ideas that could spread beyond control. Information travels quietly. It can be memorized and coded in symbols hidden within architecture or passed orally between trusted initiates. If the Templars discovered something beneath the Temple Mount, it may never have existed as a single object to seize. It may have lived within the Order itself. That possibility explains the lingering unease. Even after their dissolution, Templar symbols persist. Stories resurface. Whispers refuse to die. You cannot execute an idea. Perhaps the most dangerous relic was never placed in a vault or loaded onto a ship. Perhaps it walked out of Jerusalem in the minds of men sworn to secrecy, carrying truths the medieval world was not ready to face. And perhaps in fragments, that knowledge still survives today. The Ark of the Covenant vanishes from the biblical record without explanation. After centuries as the physical throne of God on earth, it simply disappears. No destruction is described. No burial is recorded. One moment it stands at the heart of Israelite worship, the next it is gone, leaving behind only silence and speculation. According to Scripture, the Ark contained the stone tablets of the law, Aaron's rod, and sacred manna. It was said to radiate divine power, capable of leveling walls, striking enemies dead, and communicating directly with God. By the time of the Babylonian invasion of Jerusalem in the 6th century BCE, references to the Ark abruptly stop. Later texts speak of it in the past tense as something lost, hidden, or deliberately removed. Medieval Europe did not believe the Ark was destroyed. The idea was unthinkable. Objects of such holiness were not meant to vanish. They were meant to be protected. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions all hinted that it had been concealed, awaiting the right moment to return. Some believed it lay beneath Jerusalem itself. For crusaders arriving in the Holy Land, the Ark was not a myth, but a missing treasure of divine origin. If found, it would confirm Scripture in physical form, and for an order stationed directly atop the Temple Mount, the question lingered quietly. What if the Ark had never left at all? The last known home of the Ark was the Holy of Holies within Solomon's temple, a chamber so sacred that only the high priest could enter, and only once a year. When the first temple fell, that chamber disappeared beneath layers, destruction, rebuilding, and time. By the 12th century, its exact location was uncertain, but tradition placed it beneath the Temple Mount. This is where the coincidence becomes unsettling. The Knights Templar were housed precisely on this ground. Their headquarters occupied the Al-Aqsa compound, believed by medieval scholars to sit atop the ruins of the ancient temple. No other Christian order enjoyed such access. No other group lived above the most symbolically charged location in biblical history. Contemporary descriptions suggest the Templars explored underground areas connected to the mount. They had permission, resources, and time. If the Ark had been hidden rather than removed, these knights were uniquely positioned to find it. The Church never publicly acknowledged such a possibility, but silence can be revealing. A discovery of this magnitude would have forced an immediate theological crisis. Possession of the Ark would grant unparalleled religious authority. Whether or not the Ark was there, the Templars were the only ones in a position to know, and that knowledge alone would have been enough to mark them as dangerous beyond measure. Templar symbolism is often dismissed as decorative or purely religious, but certain images recur with unsettling consistency. Chests, arcs, and box-like forms appear in seals and carvings. Some show figures kneeling before a container rather than a cross. Others depict guarded vessels with exaggerated prominence, as if the object itself were the focus of reverence. These images are not subtle, yet they are never explained. Official interpretations reduce them to metaphors, but metaphors rarely inspire secrecy or interrogation. During trials, inquisitors repeatedly asked about idols, heads, and objects the brothers allegedly revered. The descriptions vary, but the fixation remains, something physical, something contained. Some researchers note that the Ark was often described not as an abstract idea, but as a literal chest overlaid with gold, carried on poles, hidden when danger approached. If the Templars wished to reference such an object without naming it, symbolism would have been the safest language. Hidden in plain sight, these images could serve as markers for those who understood their meaning. A quiet acknowledgement passed through stone and seal. If the Ark was never meant to be displayed again, then these symbols may be the only trace left, echoes of something too powerful to reveal openly. If the Ark of the Covenant resurfaced, the consequences would be catastrophic. The Church's authority rested on interpretation, tradition, and mediated access to the divine. The Ark offered none of that. It was immediate, physical, and beyond control. Whoever possessed it would command faith directly. For kings, the threat was equally severe. Medieval rule depended on divine endorsement. Crowns were blessed, wars justified, power sanctified. An object said to channel God's will would instantly eclipse monarchs and popes alike. No throne could compete with the Ark. This explains the logic of concealment. Discovery would not bring celebration, but chaos. Rival claims, religious upheaval, and political collapse would follow. Even proving the Ark existed would destabilize the foundations of medieval society. If the Templars did find it, hiding the Ark would have been the only rational choice. Not out of greed, but survival. And if others suspected the truth, destroying the Order would be equally rational. The Ark does not need to be displayed to exert power. The mere possibility reshapes history. Perhaps that is why no definitive proof survives. Some relics are too dangerous to reveal, and some secrets are protected not by walls, but by erasure. When the Order was crushed across Europe, Scotland stood apart. In 1307, Scotland was excommunicated, locked in open conflict with England, and effectively beyond papal control. King Robert the Bruce had already been condemned by Rome, which meant papal decrees carried little authority on Scottish soil. For fleeing Templars, this made Scotland uniquely safe. Templar legends place surviving knights arriving quietly along the Scottish coast, welcomed not by churches but by necessity. Bruce needed experienced warriors, and the Templars needed protection. Later, folklore claims they fought beside him at Bannockburn, though official records remain silent. Silence, in this context, is suggestive. What matters more than battles is sanctuary. Scotland was dotted with remote abbeys, islands, and castles, far from royal oversight. It offered space to hide men, documents, and objects no longer safe elsewhere. Unlike France, there were no coordinated arrests, no mass seizures, no thorough inventories. Relics hidden there would have been effectively unreachable. Even centuries later, Scotland's terrain resists full exploration. If something needed to disappear completely, this was an ideal destination. That is why Scotland persists in Templar lore. Not because proof is abundant, but because circumstances made survival possible. Sometimes history's secrets survive not through power, but through geography and defiance combined together. While France destroyed the Templars, Portugal chose a quieter solution. King Denis did not believe the charges, or at least found them inconvenient. The order was too valuable to lose. Instead of arrests and executions, Portugal orchestrated a legal transformation. In 1319, the Templars officially dissolved. Almost immediately, a new organization appeared, the Order of Christ. Its members were the same men. Its holdings were the same lands. Its symbols, rituals, and secrecy barely changed. Only the name was new. This maneuver satisfied Rome while preserving everything that mattered. No mass confiscations occurred. No frantic searches emptied vaults. Whatever the Templars possessed in Portugal remained safely under royal protection, untouched by inquisitors. The Order of Christ would later fund Portuguese exploration, influencing navigation, mapping, and global expansion. That continuity raises a troubling idea. If relics or knowledge survived the purge, Portugal was positioned to inherit them quietly. This was not escape through flight, but through paperwork. The Templars vanished on parchment while continuing in practice. It was a masterstroke of survival. If you wanted to hide something permanently, legality was safer than secrecy, and Portugal proved that disappearance did not always require exile, only clever reinvention. Across Europe, certain castles attributed to Templar influence share unsettling features. Passageways that lead nowhere, chapels aligned to strange angles, vaults sealed behind walls with no recorded purpose. These were not architectural mistakes. They were deliberate. Military engineers of the time were practical. Stone was expensive. Space was precious. Yet Templar sites often contain areas that seem intentionally concealed rather than useful. Some chambers are accessible only through narrow shafts or hidden doors, designed to be forgotten once closed. In places like southern France, Portugal, and Scotland, legends persist of underground rooms never fully explored. Modern surveys occasionally confirm anomalies, hollow spaces behind stone, unexplained voids beneath floors. Excavations, when attempted, often stall due to funding or access restrictions. These castles feel less like fortresses and more like safes, not for people, but for objects meant to remain untouched for generations. Defense was secondary, preservation was the priority. If relics or documents needed to outlast the order itself, these structures were perfect. Stone does not confess. Walls do not testify. The architecture suggests foresight, not panic, but planning, as if the builders expected a day when secrecy would matter more than survival in plain sight. The official story insists the Templars were erased, yet erasure leaves traces, and theirs are everywhere. Symbols resurface, traditions echo, orders emerge that look suspiciously familiar. The pattern suggests transformation, not extinction. The Templars excelled at networks. They moved money, people, and information across borders long before modern states existed. Destroying their headquarters did not destroy their connections. Those survived in monasteries, merchant routes, and noble families. When the arrests came, some fled, others adapted. Some hid within new orders, others within guilds or courts. Knowledge moved quietly, passed between trusted hands. No single authority could capture it all. That explains why the mystery never settles. There is no final vault, no definitive discovery. The secrets were distributed, fragmented by design. A network survives by decentralizing. If the Templars protected dangerous relics or knowledge, this was the safest outcome. Not one hiding place, but many. Not one guardian, but a tradition of guardianship. The order may have ended in name, but its purpose endured. And if something was truly worth hiding, it would still be hidden now, waiting patiently within a network history never fully dismantled. For centuries, the official story of the Knights Templar rested on their guilt. Heresy, corruption, and moral decay were presented as settled facts, repeated until doubt faded. Then quietly, cracks appeared. Deep within the Vatican archives, documents surfaced that complicated everything historians thought they knew. Among them was the Chinon parchment, a record showing that Pope Clement V had absolved the Templar leadership of heresy years before the order was dissolved. This single document undermined the foundation of the trials. If the Pope had cleared them, why were they destroyed? And why was this absolution buried for centuries? Other files echo this contradiction. Letters reveal papal hesitation, private doubts, and political pressure exerted by the French crown. Far from leading the charge against the Templars, the Church appears reactive, constrained, and uneasy. These documents suggest the narrative of guilt was not theological, but expedient. The timing of their release is telling. They emerge not during medieval debates, but in modern eras when their impact is muted by distance. Released too late to provoke upheaval, they still whisper a dangerous truth. History did not change overnight when these files appeared. Instead, they deepened the mystery. If innocence was known, then something else justified destruction. And if that truth was suppressed once, what else remains buried in the Vatican's silence? The backbone of the Templar trials was confession, but confession obtained through fear. Prisoners were isolated, starved, and tortured until words broke free. Under such conditions, truth become secondary to survival, many Templars confess to anything that would end the pain, only to recant when the threat eased. What disturbs historians is not just the brutality, but the pattern. Confessions follow similar themes as if guided. Accusations repeat specific phrases, describe vague rituals, and avoid concrete details. Some testimonies contradict earlier statements made by the same men, sometimes within days. Even more troubling are the edits. Surviving records show signs of alteration. Statements are summarized rather than quoted. Context disappears. Questions asked by inquisitors are often missing, leaving answers suspended without explanation. It creates the illusion of coherence where none may have existed. Torture does not reveal secrets, it manufactures them. And yet, authorities treated these confessions as proof. That choice suggests the outcome was predetermined. The process existed to justify it. If the goal was truth, the method failed. If the goal was silence, it succeeded. And within those forced confessions, historians glimpse not guilt, but desperation shaped into a weapon. Despite periodic releases, vast portions of the Vatican archives remain inaccessible. Scholars know of their existence through catalog references, but are denied entry. Categories related to inquisitorial procedure, internal correspondence, and sensitive relics are among the most restricted. Requests to view these files are often rejected without explanation. When access is granted, it is partial, supervised, and limited. This fuels speculation, not because secrecy implies guilt, but because selective transparency raises questions about intent. Some sealed documents reportedly deal with post-trial asset transfers, others with internal debates within the Church. If the Templars were fully condemned, why continue deliberating? Why preserve records no one is meant to read? The Church argues these restrictions protect fragile materials or prevent misinterpretation. Yet historians note that older, more delicate texts are accessible elsewhere. Protection seems inconsistent. Secrecy has a cost. Each denied request strengthens the belief that something remains unresolved, not necessarily heresy, but complexity. And complexity is harder to control than condemnation. As long as files remain sealed, the story remains incomplete, and incomplete history invites speculation to fill the void not left behind. The possibility that the Church still protects Templar secrets is unsettling, but not implausible. Institutions endure by controlling narratives. If relics, texts, or knowledge survived the purge, their management would require absolute discretion. Some researchers suggest that certain items were absorbed quietly into Church custody, removed from circulation, and reclassified. Not destroyed, but neutralized. The safest way to eliminate a threat is to hide it in plain sight. Under authority, no one questions. This reframes the idea of loss. Perhaps the greatest Templar relics were never lost at all. Perhaps they were transferred, sealed, and recontextualized. A relic locked in a vault is less dangerous than one inspiring devotion beyond control. The Vatican has weathered centuries of upheaval. It has learned when to reveal and when to withhold. Silence can be a form of stewardship. If that is true, then the mystery is not about disappearance, but custody. Not theft, but containment. And if some truths remain too disruptive to release, they may still rest behind locked doors, preserved not for revelation, but for prevention. Among the strangest accusations leveled against the Knights Templar was the claim that they worshipped a mysterious head. Trial records describe it inconsistently. Sometimes a skull, sometimes a bearded face, sometimes a metallic idol with glowing eyes. Interrogators called it Baphomet, a name with no clear origin and no agreed meaning. What troubles historians is not the accusation itself, but the contradictions. Witnesses describe the object differently, yet all insist it existed. Some say it spoke, others claim it granted prosperity. A few describe it as a relic of immense age. These stories feel less like shared delusion and more like fragments of something real, poorly understood and badly translated under pressure. Skulls held symbolic power in medieval spirituality. They represented death, resurrection, and hidden wisdom. To accuse the Templars of venerating a head was to suggest they possessed forbidden knowledge, something outside orthodox worship. Yet no such object was ever produced. No idol was displayed. No artifact survived the trials. If it were fabricated, why did authorities pursue it so obsessively? And if it were real, why ensure it vanished completely? The enigma of the head remains unresolved because its descriptions refuse to align. But inconsistency does not always mean falsehood. Sometimes it means witnesses were struggling to describe something they were never meant to explain aloud. Templar churches and chapels often feel subtly wrong. Their proportions defy expectation. Their alignments ignore convention. Windows frame light in deliberate patterns tied to solstices and sacred geometry. These buildings do not merely house worship, they communicate something silently. Unlike grand cathedrals built for spectacle, many Templar structures are restrained, almost austere. Yet beneath that simplicity lies precision. Angles repeat. Measurements recur. Certain ratios appear again and again across regions, separated by great distance. Some scholars argue this is coincidence, the result of shared medieval building practices. Others see intention. Geometry was considered sacred, a language through which divine order could be expressed without words. Encoding information in stone was safer than writing it down. If the Templars needed to preserve knowledge across generations, architecture was ideal. Buildings survive wars, fires, and censorship. They stand quietly, waiting to be interpreted. This raises an unsettling possibility. These churches may not simply commemorate belief, but preserve instructions. Markers for those who know how to read them. Messages passed forward in stone, disguised as devotion. If so, then the symbols did not die with the order. They were never meant to. Several medieval maps attributed to or associated with Templar networks display an accuracy that feels out of place. Coastlines appear refined. Distances are consistent. Some regions are shown in detail, centuries before official exploration. Defenders argue that these maps are exaggerations or later additions. Yet the precision persists in uncomfortable ways. Certain Portolan charts show knowledge of currents, winds, and navigation routes that suggest inherited information rather than trial and error. The Templars were uniquely positioned to gather such data. They traveled constantly between east and west. They maintained ports, ships, and safe houses. Information flowed through their network as quietly as gold. Maps are symbols of control. To map something is to understand it. If the Templars preserved geographic knowledge lost elsewhere, it would explain why later explorers seemed to rediscover routes so quickly. What is more unsettling is what these maps omit. Some sacred sites are unmarked. Others are subtly emphasized, as if the map maker wanted to guide, not simply record. If these charts were never meant for public use, their survival becomes a quiet act of defiance against forgetting. Taken alone, Skulls, buildings, and maps can be dismissed as coincidence or myth. Together, they suggest pattern, symbols that endure, structures that encode, knowledge that reappears when needed. This does not feel accidental. The Templars understood erasure. They knew names could be destroyed, orders dissolved, and records burned. If they wished something to survive, it needed to be distributed, disguised, and resilient. Symbols accomplish this better than declarations. A message encoded across art, architecture, and tradition does not demand discovery. It waits. It allows time to soften resistance, to prepare minds that were once closed. Perhaps the Templars did not expect their secrets to be revealed immediately. Perhaps they expected centuries of silence, a future where questions could be asked without fear of execution. If that is true, then the persistence of these symbols is not haunting. It is deliberate. They are not remnants of a failed order, but signposts left behind. The real mystery is not whether the symbols survived. It is whether we are finally ready to understand what they were meant to say. In the modern era, the Templar mystery has not faded with better tools or stricter methods. Instead, it has grown more frustrating. Archaeological projects tied to known Templar sites often begin with enthusiasm, only to stall without explanation. Excavations are announced, preliminary findings teased, and then funding disappears. Permits are revoked. Access is suddenly restricted. This pattern repeats across Europe and the Middle East. At former commanderies, ground-penetrating surveys detect anomalies beneath stone floors. At castles linked to the order, sealed chambers are identified but never opened. Official reasons are always practical. Preservation concerns, budget constraints, political sensitivity. Yet the timing is suspiciously consistent. Researchers describe moments when progress feels encouraged, even celebrated, until a threshold is crossed. Then the work stops. No final report is published. No peer review occurs. The public is left with fragments. Archaeology thrives on transparency. Silence is not normal. When it becomes routine, questions arise about who decides when curiosity must end. The deeper the dig, the quieter the outcome. This does not prove suppression, but it mirrors historical precedent. Templar secrets have always retreated just beyond reach, leaving behind evidence of effort rather than answers. The tools have changed, the result has not. Occasionally, individuals step forward, claiming discovery. A researcher hints at unusual artifacts. A historian suggests access to restricted material. An academic proposes a connection too direct to ignore. Then, just as attention builds, the story collapses. Retractions come quickly. Statements are softened. Claims are reframed as speculation. In some cases, careers pivot abruptly away from the subject. Explanations are vague. Misinterpretation, lack of evidence, professional caution. While caution is healthy, the uniformity is unsettling. Rarely do these figures stand by their initial confidence. Rarely do they explain what changed. Silence follows curiosity like a shadow. Critics argue this reflects the pressures of academic rigor. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Yet some of these individuals were experienced, credible, and aware of the risks before speaking out. The possibility remains that some discoveries were real but inconvenient. In a world governed by institutions, truth must navigate funding, access, and reputation. Not all truths survive that journey intact. Whistleblowing is difficult when the subject challenges foundational narratives. Sometimes it is easier to step back than to push forward alone. Beyond public institutions lies a quieter world of private collections. Wealthy individuals, secretive families, and discreet organizations have long acquired artifacts away from scrutiny. Items not meant for display often vanish into these spaces, cataloged only for those with permission. Rumors persist that Templar relics reside in such hands, not on museum walls, but in vaults designed to outlast curiosity. These collections operate under legal protections, shielded from public inquiry. Ownership confers silence. Unlike public archives, private vaults are not accountable to scholarship. An artifact can exist without context, stripped of its story, its power neutralized by isolation. Some suggest that institutions themselves use private custody as a buffer. Moving sensitive items out of sight without destroying them preserves stability. The object survives. The controversy does not. This possibility reframes the mystery. The question may not be where the relics are, but who ensures they remain unseen. Control does not require denial. It requires distance. If true, then the greatest discoveries of the modern age may already have been made, quietly absorbed into places where questions are neither asked nor answered. Again and again, the pattern repeats. Discovery, excitement, silence. Each time, hope flares that this will be the moment the mystery breaks open. Each time, it fades. This cycle creates fatigue, breeding skepticism. People stop expecting answers. That may be the point. A mystery that never resolves loses its threat. Conclusive evidence demands transparency, consensus, and courage. All three are rare when the subject touches religion, power, and identity. Ambiguity becomes safer than certainty. The Templar mystery persists not because nothing is found, but because what is found never completes the story. Pieces surface without context. Clues appear without conclusions. This is how secrets survive across centuries, not through perfect hiding, but through fragmentation. No single discovery is enough. No single voice carries authority. And so silence continues, not empty, but curated. The question is no longer whether something exists, but whether we will ever be allowed to know when it does. By the time the smoke clears, the Templar story exists only in pieces. Some fragments are solid, arrests without warning, confessions under torture, empty vaults, absolution quietly granted and quietly buried. Others remain uncertain but persistent. Missing ships, sealed chambers, unexplained symbols, rumors that refuse to fade, no matter how often they are dismissed. What is known forms a strange outline. The order was powerful, secretive, and positioned at the heart of sacred history. It was destroyed with unusual speed and coordination. Its wealth and records vanished beforehand. Its guilt was declared publicly and questioned privately. That alone is enough to unsettle the official narrative. What is suspected fills the gaps between facts. That the Templars guarded objects or knowledge deemed dangerous, that they prepared for their own fall, that escape routes existed and safe havens absorbed what could not be seized. These suspicions persist because they explain what documents cannot. And then there is what was erased, files removed, testimonies edited, symbols stripped of context, silence imposed where clarity should exist. Erasure leaves fingerprints, and historians continue to trace them. Reassembling these fragments does not produce a clean answer. It produces tension, a sense that history was redirected rather than resolved. The Templar mystery survives because it was never meant to be solved neatly. It survives in the spaces between certainty and doubt, where fragments refuse to align, yet never disappear. History usually celebrates what is displayed: crowns, swords, monuments, declarations. The Templars challenged that pattern. Their influence may lie not in what they showed the world, but in what they carefully withheld. If relics existed, their power came from absence. An unseen object inspires speculation. A hidden truth reshapes behavior quietly. Kings acted, popes hesitated, orders were dissolved. None of this required public revelation. Consider how Europe changed after 1307. Financial systems shifted. New orders absorbed old knowledge. Exploration accelerated. Symbols persisted without explanation. Something moved beneath the surface, shaping outcomes without announcing itself. This suggests the Templars understood a dangerous truth. Revelation invites destruction, but concealment allows endurance. A relic displayed can be seized. A relic hidden becomes legend. Legends shape identity long after facts fade. Even false belief can alter history. The fear that the Templars possessed something destabilizing was enough to justify their annihilation, whether the relics were physical or informational matters, less than their perceived power. The greatest impact may not have been the objects themselves, but the restraint exercised around them. By refusing disclosure, the order forced institutions to react blindly. In that sense, the Templars changed history without leaving evidence that history could safely examine, and that may have been the most enduring act of all. Imagine that tomorrow, definitive proof surfaced. A relic authenticated beyond doubt, a document released without redaction, a discovery too clear to dismiss. The shock would not be archaeological, it would be existential. Religions are built on continuity and interpretation. A revelation that bypasses both would fracture authority. Faith would not vanish, but it would be forced to renegotiate its foundations. Institutions thrive on control of narrative. Sudden clarity removes that control. Political power would feel the tremor as well. History legitimizes borders, laws, and identities. Altering its core destabilizes more than belief. It unsettles order. The reaction would not be celebration. It would be containment. Debates over authenticity, context, and intent would flood discourse. Doubt would be encouraged. Consensus delayed. That reaction alone would prove the point. Truth does not always liberate. Sometimes it threatens structures that depend on ambiguity. The Templars may have understood this better than anyone. Perhaps they did not hide relics because the world was unworthy, but because it was unready. If the truth emerged tomorrow, the question would not be what the Templars knew, but whether modern society could face it without repeating the same mistakes. 700 years later, the Templars are still hunted, not by soldiers, but by curiosity. Every generation believes it will be the one to finally uncover the truth, and every generation is left with questions instead of closure. That persistence is telling. Most medieval mysteries fade. This one evolves. It adapts to new tools, new theories, new fears. The core remains unchanged. Something was taken, something was hidden, and something was never meant to resurface easily. Perhaps there is no single vault waiting to be opened, no final artifact waiting for discovery. Perhaps the secret is distributed, alive in fragments, surviving because no one piece is decisive. Secrets that endure do so by refusing to resolve. They invite pursuit, but deny possession. The Templar mystery may be one of those. The order was destroyed, but its silence was not. That silence continues to provoke questions that institutions still prefer unanswered. And so the story does not end with revelation, but with waiting. Waiting for the moment when history, belief, and power align enough to allow the truth to surface. Until then, the secret remains exactly where it has always been. just out of reach, refusing to stay buried.